So let's break this down a little bit further, knowing these components of the standard. Let's look at the differences in structure for literary texts versus informational. Let's look at how these things get us to meaning by using writing techniques. So let's consider literary texts versus informational texts, specifically looking at structure. So literary texts, structures of literary texts include elements of fiction. So these you've probably learned a little bit about before, right? Hopefully this is review. So you've got plot, you've got characters, you've got conflict, setting, theme. These basic elements of fiction, you remember they kind of go on like a plot line like this, maybe you've seen before. These are specific ways that a writer will organize a piece of literary text. The structure then is made up of these things. For example, right? That's in fiction, right? But you've also got poetry. And with poetry, you have form. So is it a sonnet? Is it a villanelle? Is it an ode? What kind of poem is it? That dictates its structure. So you're looking then at maybe rhyme. You're looking at line breaks and stanzas and lots of other poetic devices. Okay, so these things are choices that the poet makes with the organization of their poetry. And then you also have drama. These are all the different kind of genres of literary texts. In a piece of drama, you have acts and scenes, and how these things are broken down create the organization, the structure of the piece down to its bones. Like this, these create kind of the blueprint of the story that then the writer is going to lay over some elements that are a little bit more specific to writing technique, which we'll talk about in a moment. So, okay, that's some good thinking about structures of literary text. Let's also consider structures of informational text. So, structures of informational text. When we're talking about informational texts, we're talking about genres like essays, articles, nonfiction books, even memoir would actually be considered informational. And the way that these are structured, specifically essays and articles, is through 5 different text structures, which you learned in elementary school, if you remember. Cause and effect. The author gives a cause and says, this is the effect. Problem solution. This is the problem. Here's the solution I'm proposing. It could just be a description, like a descriptive piece, where they're just sort of maybe describing their personal perspective on an issue, or it could also sequence a process. So this might be more instructional, like a how-to article or something. Anyways, those are sort of larger structures of how the ideas are organized. So this is about ideas being presented in a certain way. And then you have some other actual physical text structures on the page, like titles and maybe photos, or other visuals with captions. These are specific to informational text usually. And then you have little like headings, section headings. These are ways that nonfiction writers indicate and prioritize the information on the page. Okay, so now we've got some ideas of, literary texts are structured using these elements. Nonfiction or informational texts are structured using some of these things, right? But let's now take a look at actually some writing techniques that both have in common. So when we think about writing techniques, these are choices that the writer takes, or choices that the writer makes in either case. If you're a writer, if you're a novelist, so that makes you a literary writer, you're doing this. If you are an essayist or a journalist, maybe you're writing more informational text, you're also making these choices. Different writing techniques, which you might also hear me call craft moves. These are just the choices that the writer is making beyond the organizational. So this is really looking at the sentence level, at the word level. Some examples to be looking for in literary and informational text include, a lot of things. Dialogue. You might look for figurative language. So that's like simile and metaphor. You're looking for things like personification, general imagery, etc. There are lots of those. Those are kind of the big, obvious three. But then you're looking even closer at the sentence level, something that we call syntax. And this is just really the structure of the sentences, we'll say. Syntax, you'll learn a lot more about in high school, but it's important to know in the context of this conversation because you need to notice as a reader, what is the writer doing here with the length of their sentences? Are they simple and short? Are they long and complex? When a writer, for example, puts together very long flowing sentences and then hits you with a very short fragment, even, that has an effect. As the writer, you need to know about this because this is how you control your audience's experience. So syntax is actually quite important, and we won't go too deep into it, but I just want you to understand that authors make choices about the length and the complexity of their sentences in order to have a specific impact on their reader. So the structure of sentences is important. And then craft moves down to, at the word level, diction. This is just word choice. All right. What we'll learn a little bit more about later with syntax and diction is that these have a very direct relationship with tone and mood. So some writing techniques, right? When we're asking this question about comparing these two structures to understand how the structure contributes to the meaning and style. When we say style, we're talking about the actual writing techniques, the craft moves that he or she is employing to help you get to this. But theme is something that we talk about with literature a lot, but informational texts have a theme also. They have a purpose. When we're talking about theme, we're talking about purpose. You need to ask yourself, what does the writer want me to walk away thinking, knowing, feeling, or doing as a result of reading this piece?